draw from diverse backgrounds and countries of expertise and provide a space for discussing approaches and nuances of research in gender in relation to environment, development, and beyond. Today, it is hosted by Dr. Maria Hillesland, Research Officer in Development Economics in the Department of International Development. She is also our main moderator today, and her name today is Questions, so you know that you're addressing who to write your questions. And also myself, my name is Dr. Marina Korzunevica. I'm a human geographer at the School of Geography and Environment, also at the University of Oxford. We are affiliated with the Project REACH, a global research program to improve water security for the poor by delivering science that transforms policy and practice. It is our fourth seminar in the series, and you're very welcome to watch previous seminars on YouTube. And on your chat box, you will be able to see the link to the playlist where previous seminars stored. Likewise, this seminar we will also upload today. Before we start, I would briefly introduce the format. We will have a presentation that will be followed by a Q&A session. You are welcome to type your questions at any time. We will ask directly questions only if it's of a clarifying nature during the presentation, and keep your main questions for afterwards. It would be nice if you could write next to your question whether you want to ask yourself or you want us to read it. It would be nice to keep it a more lively online discussion, so you could ask yourself. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Dr. Leith Dunn, who is a Jamaican sociologist and gender specialist, former head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies and MONA unit at the University of West Indies in Jamaica, and is currently a senior associate researcher and lecturer at the university. She has worked with national, regional, and international development agencies, including the United Nations. And her research and publications have focused on gender mainstreaming and social, economic, political development, and environmental justice. Dr. Dunn has received several awards for her contribution to promoting gender justice and equality. And in 2019, apolitico.com named her as one of the 100 most influential persons globally promoting gender equality and gender policies. It is truly our honor to have you with us, Dr. Dunn, and now the floor is yours, and I'm very keen to hear your presentation today.
Thank you very much, Marina, and thank you to you and your colleagues for inviting me to make this presentation as part of your gender research and action in the Global South. As you can know, I'm from the Global South. I'm Jamaican, but I'm actually living in Botswana right now. I also want to thank Dr. Karen Carpenter, head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and Ms. Ingrid Nicely for facilitating this link since May 2021. I also want to thank Professor Dale Weber, principal of the Mona campus, who yesterday appointed me with this team, honorary senior research fellow at the University of the West Indies, linked to the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. I also want to thank Honorable P.J. Patterson, who is head of the P.J. Patterson Center for African and Caribbean Advocacy, to naming me as a fellow. Professor Aldry Henry Lee, who is director of the Sir Arthur Institute for Social and Economic Research. And we have done research with several of these organizations. But I also want to thank Professor Eudine Barreto, who introduced me to the International Association for Feminist Research, Feminist Economics rather. And this has been a home. The journal is very good and is linked to what we're talking about today. At a more personal level, I want to thank my husband, Professor Houghton Dunn, who is Professor of Media and Communication Studies, provides critical feedback, and we do research together. Our daughter, Dr. Jessica Dunn, was just joined Nottingham Trent University as a senior lecturer in psychology, and our son, Mr. Jamani Dunn, who is a multimedia specialist and helped with the presentation. So I'll just go into what I'm going to talk about today. I want us to recognize the Caribbean context as a small island developing state, look at some concepts and commitments that we usually consider for the research that has been done on mainstreaming gender in climate change and disaster risk management. I want to expose you to some of the vulnerabilities of Caribbean small island developing states to climate change and hazards like hurricanes. Then I want to move into the gender mainstreaming and participatory action research studies, sharing some of the experiences we have had and the lessons learned, showing how we can use disaggregated data to capture differences, and finally, how we can use this information and these tools to promote policy advocacy and sustainable development. So this is the image we often see of the Caribbean. There's the Dunn's River Falls here, beautiful rivers, beaches, food, all of these things. Now, the other side of this paradise is that small island developing states are dependent on tourism, and we're very vulnerable to climate change. We see, for example, Haiti. Haiti has suffered several earthquakes, hurricanes, and these are livelihoods which are destroyed, but also infrastructure, and therefore it is very much a part of our lived experiences. Here we see St. Vincent and the Grenadines. A volcanic eruption earlier this year devastated a lot of the country, and we can see the impact of the ash on cars, homes, and so on. All of these things impact males and females of different age groups differently. So with some of these issues, we felt it was important for us to build awareness and capacity to do research in gender, climate change, disaster risk management, to advocate for the inclusion of gender diversity, but also vulnerable groups. So we see images here of children being led through water. This might have been an afternoon flood. Heavy rains one afternoon, has created a hazard for children, and a lot of persons think of what is in that water, and if they get sick, who is going to look after them? We see bananas. The country is well known for its export of bananas, and a hurricane can destroy that. Here's a man sweeping out from floods, infrastructure like roads having been destroyed, and people stranded, unable to cross the street in one part of an urban center because of a shower of rain. So this is a flash flood, and this is the kind of impact that it has on us. And this is not even a hurricane, this is a flash flood. Next, we look at our resilience. The fact is that living in the Caribbean region and the risks we face from natural hazards mean that we have to be resilient. So we see male and female farmers here replanting because food security is one of the challenges that we do have. Next, I look at some concepts and commitments. So we want to understand gender as a socially constructed concept. We look at roles and responsibilities ascribed related to masculinity and femininity, but several gender identities. We look at unequal issues around power, asset ownership, knowledge and resources, and the differential risks. So in the work and research we have done, we have tended to use and ensure that persons understand what gender is, what the roles and responsibilities are, because these impact people's lived experiences. So we know, for example, that there's a difference between paid and unpaid work for women, and that's goal 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals. The work that is done in the household as care work is not valued in the same way as is paid work outside the home or for income. So we have the result of a gender wage gap between males and females, which creates a lot of other kind of vulnerabilities. We see here a meme on communicating the difference between equality, the same bicycle, the same, as opposed to equity, persons getting what they need, which is different, all to ensure that we have equitable access to resources and livelihoods. We also need to include those who are not male or female. So we look at transgender persons, the whole spectrum, of persons who are transgender. We look also at intersectionality in relation to disability, and increasingly this is an important factor that we need to take on board in research, because it means that if we do not, we can exclude important persons and violate their rights. So here what I've done is to look at the rights of the policy framework we normally use when we're doing our research, or gender sensitive research, and our participatory action research. So we know globally, although we had a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the women as a group have consistently suffered discrimination within the household, in the workplace, in the labor market, but also in political spheres and in relation to power, as well as in terms of how we impact and interface with the environment. So we use the rights and the articles of the CEDAW Convention, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, to understand areas of discrimination and advocacy and research to redress it. Next, we have the children, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and those are important as well. On the right hand, you will see the rights of older persons, the Madrid Declaration on Aging, and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But as a former UNFPA staff member, I also look at the International Conference on Population and Development Declaration and the Program of Action, which looks at sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. So these are factors that are some of the factors that we consider when we're looking at research, the background and framework for our research. Of course, everyone is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. These 17 goals, which were introduced in 2015 to replace the Millennium Development Goals 2010 to 2015, and several of them have to deal with today's topic. So for example, Goal 5 on gender equality is very relevant when we're talking about mainstreaming gender. And in fact, Goal 5, or gender, is considered a cross-cutting issue for the achievement of all the goals and the targets, all these 17 goals. But we also look at Goal 10, which is reduced inequalities. And the concept of participatory action research means including persons, right, to reduce those inequalities. But also Goal 16, I think, also does a similar issue. And of course, today we're talking about climate change, Goal 13, 14, 15, and all of the others. Our policy framework is always complemented by commitments to gender, climate change, and disaster risk management, integrating them. So gender is cross-cutting with climate change, and here's an example on agriculture, recognizing the differentiated impacts of gender-differentiated impacts of climate change on males and females of different age groups. In agriculture, depending on our roles and responsibilities, it's also going to be impacted. And agriculture, of course, is impacted by climate change. I put here a toolkit, an image of a toolkit from one of our partners, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, with which we have done some of the work I'm reporting on today. So there are global commitments. We try and integrate them in the research that we're doing. Next, we look at gender-sensitive participatory action research for climate change and disaster risk management. I'm assuming that we're coming from different disciplines, so I just want to briefly explain what gender mainstreaming is. It's a process, and we look at the implications for men and women of any planned action, including legislation, policies, and programs at all levels. But it's also a strategy to make the concerns and experiences of population groups integral in the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs. And the aim is to ensure that we benefit everyone and inequality is not perpetuated. When we mainstream gender in research, we do it from the design stage, data collection and analysis stage, but also it underscores the importance of collecting data disaggregated by sex, age, union status, occupation, locality, disability, all of these other things. And essentially, we want to look at power structures that impact vulnerability and risk. And we use this for assessments, risk assessment. And then we do gender analysis. What do these roles, relations, and responsibilities mean, these differences, and how do they make people vulnerable, different population groups vulnerable to climate change hazards? Sex segregated data has many benefits. It combats this gender blindness, assuming that everyone is the same. It facilitates understanding of differences, as I've explained. It facilitates monitoring and evaluation of policies and programs and projects. So we encourage and teach this consistently. Next, we look at participatory action research, and it's a qualitative research method, and it facilitates dialogue for change. Some of the core concerns are about power and powerlessness, and it collects data on the lived experiences of marginalized groups, taps into their values, acknowledges their knowledge that they bring, and their experiences that provide accurate information that you would not get from doing a survey. And it's the approaches that are used in participatory action research help to reduce knowledge hierarchies between the researcher and participants. What are some of the methods? Some of them are similar to other forms of research. So we have literature reviews, and I underscore gray literature because not all research that is done is published in peer-reviewed journals, but it is also valid. So there's gray literature, which might have been PhD theses, studies that have been done, there are technical reports, some of which are unpublished, and there is also organizational data. But we also use focus group discussions, key informant interviews, and then we triangulate the data, analyze it, and where possible, we have validation workshops. So you're collecting information from individuals, and you want to ensure that what you have gained collectively can be verified. Other methods, participant observation, we have community meetings, or what we call town hall meetings. We have resource mapping. We are identifying problems. We're helping with visioning, but also causal analysis using loop diagrams, as we have done recently, working on a project with food and nutrition with another university department, looking at household income and security, food security. But transect walks, just walking through a community and making drawings of what have experiences. Look at where this water came up to the last time we had a flood. What are the likely risks associated with that? Then we also have testimonials, drama, drawings, which provide valuable insight and enable people to talk about their experiences. Some people also use diaries, you know, talking to your diaries from your family, your community, or what have you. But we also use timelines of what things happened at a particular time. So if I mention to Jamaicans of a particular age group, Hurricane Gilbert, 1987, that was a hallmark, you know, very, very difficult hurricane, or Hurricane Ivan to persons in Grenada. And then this methodology also means engaging with your stakeholders, including policymakers. So when we're doing action research, it's not always easy to access some groups. So I've just flagged, for example, some of the groups, the hard to reach groups, and there are whole methodologies around this. So children at risk. In research we have done on child labor, child trafficking, we use key informants, and then in talking with children, it might mean using photos, drawings. For persons with disabilities, we recognize the need for sign language for the deaf and Braille for the blind. Then men who have sex with men. In our Caribbean region, LGBTQ persons, men who have sex with men, suffer stigma and discrimination. So we have to work with key informants, institutions, and do snowball sampling to engage, to understand where their vulnerabilities are, to climate change and disasters. Then with sex workers, we have a sex workers association. So research has meant, working with key informants and again, doing snowballing. And similarly with rural women, the Rural Women's Network is a partner of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies, and I've worked with them, as we have with household workers unions. So these are some of the approaches that we have used to doing research with these groups. So I now want to share some of the partnerships we have developed for research and policy advocacy, particularly around gender, climate change, and disaster risk management. So in 2009, UNDP asked us to do 8 studies, enhancing gender visibility in disaster risk management and climate change. And out of the findings, which was that there were differences, but people didn't know how to mainstream gender, I developed a course, Gender, Climate Change, and Disaster Risk Management. And this publication, Working Paper 7, which was published with the Frederick Ebert Stiftung office in Jamaica, Mrs. Judith Wedderburn, who was director at the time, meant that we were able to publish the research done by the students in that course and empower them to be able to do change and advocacy in their own communities. Next, we have here the example of a project we worked on with another department of the university, which is the Disaster Risk Reduction Center and the Institute for Sustainable Development. And this was a Canadian-funded project, the EKA CDM initiative, enhancing knowledge and application of comprehensive disaster management, which again speak to the multifaceted, recognizing the multifaceted vulnerabilities. And you're looking at building that knowledge to be able to prevent as well as to protect and to recover from disasters. So that was also very helpful, because it meant also working with some of the very students we had trained and other partners to do that. And we did manuals, did a lot of other work out of the studies that were done. And then I did a chapter contribution on men masculinity, this publication on men, masculinities, and disaster, edited by Elaine Enerson and Bob Pease. And again, we looked at the vulnerabilities of men in the Caribbean, who we might often forget when we're talking about disaster risk management. We have here another publication exploring the intersections between gender and climate change in the Caribbean. And this was done with myself and Kimberly Carr Tobias, one of our graduates, and she taught part-time and is one of the first graduates from the BSc program. And this is just a picture of one of the activities we had with the Commonwealth Foundation in Jamaica, which was at the regional headquarters. So these are NGOs from across the Caribbean and some folks from UNDP, teaching them about gender, mainstreaming gender and climate change. And these were, this is the former director, and these were some of the activities there. Our other partners have included the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, again, teaching disaster risk managers about how to mainstream gender and how to collect sex disaggregated data. We've done training with the Caribbean Development Bank, collaborated with the Food and Agricultural Organization, for example, doing a training session in Guyana with bureau heads, the heads of gender bureaus and farmers. We also partner with our national institutions. So the work that I'm talking about is supposed to impact policy and advocacy. And a partnership with the Gender Bureau, the Bureau of Gender Affairs in Jamaica, has been particularly helpful, because you have a whole network of gender focal points, and through them we are able to share. And some of those gender focal points are in fact graduates of the university. We have worked also with the UWI Center for Disability Studies, and this is Senator Dr. Floyd Morris, who is the director, who is blind and is an advocate for the rights of persons with disabilities. And they have done conferences on climate change and disaster risk management, and we have contributed from that point of view. And this is a publication by Panos and the Frederick Ebert Stiftung, I raise it here because in addition to a written print version of this on early warning systems for persons with climate change, it did a Braille version. So it means that we can also do disseminate information through diverse means. So some of the inclusive tools that we use for advocacy, there's capacity building, and I want to underscore the fact that building a cadre and having a degree program in gender and development, which includes exposing them to climate change and disaster risk management, it means you're having a multiplier effect. Of course, as those graduates move on, they're going to do further research, they're going to be advocates, and some of them even, for example, participating in meetings of the Committee of the Parties, the COP, for example, in Glasgow in November, right? Technical and academic reports are another way of disseminating. We do policy briefs, conference presentations, and then have communication tools for our different target audiences. So infographics, for example, not everybody is reading. So infographics are important, videos, social media. And we also use UN days and months to commemorate special events. So it's whether it's an International Women's Day, International Men's Day, and other things. Here we have another project we did with ACDI VOCA with farmers. What is the impact of climate change on women and men and youth? And I raise it because one of the participatory ways of communicating information is to use fish diagrams. So this is a fish diagram which came out of there, which looks at the impact of climate change on females. And we have done the same thing. So it looks at the effects on farmers, their adaptation strategies and recommendations, their health and environmental effects, and the effects on the household. So in a fish diagram, you can synthesize information from participatory action research that is gender sensitive. I just put in this also, the importance of us creating child-friendly materials when we're dealing with gender, climate change, and disaster risk management. Children are at risk, and communicating to them in language using graphics or ways in which they can easily understand is equally important. Of course, working with vulnerable groups. So the training that we have done in the gender, climate change, and disaster risk management course and the research has always included input from our UWI Center for Aging and Wellness. And Professor Denise Eldemeyer Scherer has been a global advocate on this. So we bring her in and sensitize the students to that. So what are the main messages I wanted to raise today? Gender mainstreaming and participatory action research are effective tools to collect and analyze qualitative data. Why do we need it? We can use it, or how do we use it? Needs assessments, vulnerability assessments for climate change adaptation, and supporting what we call comprehensive disaster management, which means you're adopting a holistic approach to the issue of disaster management. And gender is very much a cross-cutting issue there, disability and inclusion issues. So the participatory action research and gender mainstreaming and the collection and analysis of data disaggregated by sex enables you to do these needs assessments, but it also helps to understand assets. What are the assets that are there, right? There's a human rights advocacy, which we can use the findings for. And we're always thinking about what is the difference between our policy commitments and our practices. Yes? What is the difference between all of those human rights commitments I mentioned before, or commitments to mainstreaming gender in climate change and disaster risk management? And what are we doing? So it creates a framework for advocacy, for raising awareness, for empowerment. And these are factors that we take into consideration, right? Then it provides evidence-based policymaking. This action research complements and provides valuable insight that a survey might not be able to do, right? So building partnerships with policymakers has in fact been a productive way of advocacy for our Institute for Gender and Development Studies. Working with community groups, NGOs, faith-based organizations, and specific groups of vulnerable groups enable us to mobilize and empower them for action. So these are some of the main messages I wanted to share today. And I think that's it. Questions, comments?
Thank you very much for your presentation, for keeping it on time. It was indeed a very, sorry, I forgot to start my video. You have really mapped so much of different work every year of yourself and your team. We have a question from Priyanka. Do you want to ask it yourself?
I could. Just a minute. Yeah, I can't remember what I asked now. Yeah, I was just thinking, I just want to congratulate Dr. Dunn and everybody else on this amazing amount of research that seems to you have done in the Caribbean. I come from Asia and South Asia, particularly we have a network there called the South Asian Disaster Risk Reduction Network, which is called Duryog Nivaran. And I was just thinking that a lot of this intersectional research doesn't exist in our region. So firstly, I would certainly go back to trying to find these documents and share them with my colleagues. But the other thing I would really like to know from you is, what are some of the key takeaways that you had from doing this research?
Okay, so thank you very much for that. Do you want me to answer now, Marina?
Yes,
I can
please.
go ahead. Yes. Okay. So you didn't say what Southeast Asian country you're in?
Well, right now I'm in Malaysia, but I am originally from Sri Lanka.
Okay. All right. There is a wonderful NGO called PRIA, Participatory Research in Asia. And that's been one of my partners for decades in my previous life. And they have resources, PRIA. But yes, in essence, I was saying that using gender mainstreaming, a commitment to gender mainstreaming, which is a UN mandate from the Economic and Social Council, says that we need to integrate gender in all development policies and programs. So my argument is that we have to find ways of integrating gender perspectives, gender being a cross-disciplinary, cross-cutting issue in our research design, in our data collection, in our analysis, all of that. And I'm also arguing for the benefits of participatory action research, which has been around from the 1940s with Kurt Lewin, yeah? And has evolved over time. What we're doing is adapting it for climate change and disaster risk management. So I'd be happy to share some of those resources with you, because they have proven very effective working with institutions. And I mentioned that because we are small, we can't do everything ourselves, but by partnering strategically with institutions, it means that sharing this, integrating it, training them, training their staff, means that you can have a multiplier effect on changing the behavior, get better quality behavior, better quality data, to understand the impact of climate change and disaster, how you manage disaster, how to prevent it, and so on. So it's about human rights, making sure that we are committed to all of the conventions that we have ratified, that is for women, children, labor, persons with disabilities. We're talking about ensuring that whatever it is we're doing, we're respecting human rights. And we're also raising awareness, empowering people using through these methods, and supporting and working with policymakers and communities. I hope that answered.
Sorry, but not quite. I totally buy your idea of participatory research. It's something I've been doing for years, but that's not really wasn't my or gender mainstreaming, because I'm a feminist and I've been an activist for a while. What I was just going to ask you is, what are your key headline findings from this research? Because doing an intersectional research, looking at disabilities, looking at queer people and the impact of disasters on them, is not really that much in the disaster risk reduction body of knowledge.
Okay, so I can give you an example, which is included in the book, Men, Masculinities and Disasters. So if you think of a disaster, you have to go to a shelter. If the shelter is not accommodating of different sexuality groups, it means that a person who is, men who have sex with men, lesbians, they're going to be at risk in that shared environment. So you have to think about intersectionality, and that's one of the lessons that we have actually learned in terms of key findings. Similarly, if you do not have a shelter which is physically accessible for someone with a physical disability, and you have a ramp at the right level, or the toilets are not going to be adequate to enable someone with a wheelchair with dignity to go to the bathroom and be independent, it means that we have a lot of work to do. If you're not communicating in sign language, early warning systems, it means that persons who are deaf will not be able to get the information they need and to move. So those are some of the takeaways that we have in terms of findings from our research.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone else had any questions? You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Thank you for the question and answer. Please write your questions. And meanwhile, while people are thinking, I would like to ask questions for myself. There are two things that I have been thinking for quite a while as I have been trying to do participatory research myself. The first one is, how do you, if at all, if you do that, how do you discuss your results of research with your respondents later? So you have shown a slide of how you can advocate for them and how do what are the different avenues for that, but do you take the research results and take it back to the respondents to discuss that with them or to present? So this is the first question. And the second question is about sampling. With participatory research, we like to think that it really breaks the boundaries between the researcher and the respondents. And we try to eliminate this top-down approach that we usually have in other ways of research. However, when we do sampling, we inevitably pick and choose someone. So we still have this power of choosing people, power of sampling. And this is something what we try to do in my own research, like how to eliminate it and how to make it on more voluntary basis, and at the same time not to exclude most vulnerable people. I don't know if that's clear what I'm trying to say.
No, that's very clear. And in fact, for the first one, the issue of your how do you share the research? So I'm going to give you the example from work we did for the Commonwealth Foundation, which is 53 countries, and they wanted to work on mainstreaming gender and climate change and disasters in the Caribbean. So we engaged them through online research and collected the information, but we also had that validation workshop. So I'm going to go back to that picture, and the implications of this picture on the left is just one of the ways you talk about things. You know, this is what we're hearing. We have dialogue here, and that is what this picture is about, right? So these are persons from civil society organizations working on climate change, persons with disability, or from farmers, all sorts. So that issue of taking it back to them and saying, is this what you want? Is this adequate? All of that is built into the process of developing a learning tool, an advocacy tool for them. And then coming back afterwards, about a year, to say, has this worked? Where are the gaps? And you can build on it. In terms of the sampling, you saw me mention snowball sampling. Now, one of the limitations of participatory action research, you're not going to get, you can't get a quantitative, you don't have a database, yes? But it means that you're using key informants to get insight into groups who can give you valuable information. You share it afterwards, and then you can do follow-up research when the time or the resources allow. And being from developing countries means that we don't always have lots of money. So we have to make do with what we have, get a snapshot, and do the best that we can, and then use that effectively. And then on the basis of that, you then get other information, get other resources to do other research. Yes? I don't know if that answers you, Medina.
Partially, yes. Coming back to the same, I would still like to, firstly, one notification, please write your questions, and we open up for everyone to see all the questions in the chat. But coming back to my question, so you said that you're discussing with NGOs, but do you discuss also with people with whom you, from whom you take in the data, so respondents, those victims of the flash floods or hurricanes?
Yes, and that would have been done also with community groups. I should say that Hurricane Ivan in the Caribbean was a watershed for gender mainstreaming in climate change and disaster risk management, because UNDP, UN ECLAC, Economic and Social Council, and persons in Grenada did an assessment from a gender perspective. So that enabled them to go and talk with persons, see who was affected, how, where, looking at vulnerabilities. So that created information on which we could build. So you cannot do disaster risk management without going back to the persons themselves who are affected, yes? So I just wanted to flag that as the issue of dialogue. If you're developing tools, the tools must be adapted to the needs of your target audiences. The idea is to always, where possible and as far as possible, to consult with them. Is this what you meant? Is this what you're saying? Yes?
Yes, it's partially about building the research, but also coming back to talking to NGOs. Do NGOs also come back to the respondents and discuss it again and again? I know it would be an ideal world, but I think it's really, really hard to make it in the research. But this is something what I have tried to figure out myself, how to do that. Also because we don't have this so many partners of NGOs that we can leave the legacy behind. So when we do the participatory research, how to come back to the community and to discuss the results. And some of the issues will be on gender that sometimes are sensitive within the communities, and how to present it in an honest way, but also without making particular groups more vulnerable.
Yes, I really want to underscore this Commonwealth Foundation experience, because they did a consultation in Barbados. They used as conversations then. We did the research, did the tool, came and discussed it. But a year later, they came back and said, okay, what did you do with it? Was it effective? What have you been able to do? And that was really very humbling, because a lot of people had actually used the information, had built on it. They used it to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, for example. This young man who is, has a disability, he was able to mobilize with his community groups using the tool, right? So you said, okay, and they will build on it afterwards.
Yeah,
Work in
wonderful.
progress.
Thank you.
Work in progress. It's very hard, but it's very rewarding.
Yes.
Any other questions from participants? Did I talk too much?
I think we have a question coming.
Yes.
We have a question from the questions.
Okay, let's go.
I'm fairly new. I'm an economist by background, so I have a particular way of gathering data. So I'm fairly new to participatory action and that type of research. So I'm just wondering if you could give some more examples of participatory action research for me. I'm quite curious.
Okay, so I think I'll go back here. All right, so this, I mean, there are different ways in which you can do it, and you have a whole supermarket of strategies. The idea is to select what works for you, what resources you have, what time you have, and a lot of those other factors. So for example, participant observation means that if you are part of an organization or a group or a community group or a church, a faith-based organization, you could observe what is happening there and use your gender lens to collect information on where the vulnerabilities and gaps are. Town hall meetings, you have an agenda, you know, we were washed out by floods 6 times, you know, there was garbage in the gullies, and that created a lot of blockage of drains. Or we have had droughts, right? Farmers with droughts, because the climate change and the extremes of weather also mean severe, having a severe impact on the livelihood. So agriculture in rural areas is one. You might have a town hall meeting and people talk about what their experience has been. Was there a new construction in the community that caused these floods? What can we do to harvest water? What can we do to protect ourselves and replant? Are there things we can do collectively, right? To be able to adapt to this climate change? What kind of technical assistance do women farmers need? Or, you know, can we talk with the banks? Another study I recently did for the International Labour Organization.
Sorry, Dr. Dunn, I think we can't hear you that well.
Let's see if, can you hear me now?
Can you say something again, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. For some reason, it was just very quiet.
Oh, it could be bandwidth, where God is good today, you know, as always, we've been having good internet. But thanks for letting me know. So town hall meetings or any kind of forum where you talk about it, whether it is at a school, a church, you know, a faith-based organization, providing a forum where you can honestly talk about problems and not allowing one particular group to dominate is also important. So gender enables you to see who is likely to more want to hog the show, as we say in Jamaica, to dominate, whose voices want to dominate. What are the underlying inequalities? And for us, it is class, not so much race and ethnicity, but class, right? So you use your intersection lens to look at differences and make sure that you create an enabling environment for participation. Resource mapping, what do we have around us that we can use? So the work we did with the ACDI vocal farmers in those rural communities, how could you do agro-processing if you have a surplus of when the harvests come in of your fruit and vegetables? What can you do to actually process those, preserve them, and market up the value chain? How do you reduce post-harvest losses? Who is going to do what, and so on? So all of those things are so very important. when we're talking about using participatory action research. Visioning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Visioning. What is your vision of this community 5 years from now? What do we need to do to change it? Yes. If there is unemployment of males, females, young people, we have a number of older people in the community. And when we had a flood last time, they were at severe risk. So you're visioning what your community will look like down the road, because we're living with this crisis of climate change and these natural hazards which can become disasters. The transect walks, you walk through the community, look at what is where, you draw a map on that, and you can share that in a community group, a meeting. Testimonials, people telling stories, where we come from oral societies, yeah? So in a rural community, you might want to hear what happened, or in an inner city, hearing testimonials of what happened when there was a flood or a disaster or what have you. I remember a student, I was really very moved in the gender, climate change and disaster risk management. He lived in a community on a hill, and because of politics, they weren't able to get to assistance, right? Now that's something you don't really think about it, but by engaging him, he was able to develop a film for his project, his assignment, right? So these are some of the strategies, but I want to also underscore dialogue with policymakers. Policymakers need this kind of support. It's not about the macro, it's about the micro research that is shared and brings in people's knowledge. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Sorry, Maria, I'm going to respond on your behalf. We have 2 more questions, and I really like this this point that it's a micro research. It's really good to remember it. But we have 2 more questions. First from Arlette. Do you want to ask yourself?
Thank you so much.
Arlette.
Hello, how are you doing? Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge on just the broad diversity of gender mainstreaming research that has taken place in the Caribbean. And I'm quite encouraged. This is not exactly a field I'm strong on, like the last person who posed the question. So I'm still learning and really happy to hear that we have this rich, this rich experience that we can draw on. I'm working on a project that's looking at assessing stakeholder engagement across the region, 9 countries. And I wanted to get from you as an expert in this field who has this experience, which project, if you could look back at those you have been involved in or those you've read about in the Gray and peer-reviewed literature, which one do you think best mainstream gender in its project conceptualization, design, and implementation? And if you could share what metrics do you think would you use in evaluating that project? So which project you think did it for whatever reason? And then if I had to come after you and really make that assessment, what metric would you suggest I use to, I hope that's clear.
Okay, so the project you're talking about, Arlette, is not the food and nutrition, not the FAN project. It's
no,
right?
No, it's one with around climate financing. Sorry, so it's
financing,
a different one. So we're trying to assess the nature of stakeholder engagement across the region, and looking at how gender has been incorporated into the planning of these projects and the implementation. So just wanting to think about, as far as gender mainstreaming is concerned, what would you have to say about how to conduct such a task, and what would you use if you had to do it, looking at projects you have been involved in? What would be the way to assess a well-designed or a well-implemented project that has mainstreamed gender? I hope that made it clear.
Okay, I think that you're looking at your economic variables, indicators, and income. You're looking at your poverty indicators as well, and data on that. And the countries in the region do have that. But also reviewing literature on the impact, the financial cost of disasters, and that information is available. SEDIMA has it, the Caribbean Development Bank has it, and so on, right? So you can shoot me an email afterwards and I can tell you more, but there is information available. But you're looking at assets, inequality in relation to assets, and how climate financing needs to be targeted at particular groups to be able to reduce risk, yes, and be effective.
So you're talking about look at the project, how the project did this, because that's what we're trying to evaluate. How did the project do it in its design and implementation? So what would be the
you're always considering the gender implications, collecting sex disaggregated data, and I'm sure there are indicators out there. But I can send you some information afterwards if you shoot me an email.
Sure, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Arlette. Great to have you.
And I can see that Priyanti wants to ask again. Would you like to do that? We have 3 minutes for a very quick question, a very quick answer.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't really want to hog the discussion, but while the other questions were being raised, I just wondered whether in the participatory research that you're doing, who sets the agenda for the research? Do you use it also to have the communities set the agenda, or is the agenda already set? Because we talked a lot about data collection in a participatory way and all of that, and feeding back to the communities. But the step before that, at an agenda of who sets the agenda for the research?
Okay, it's an excellent question again. Thanks very much. It is a bit of both, because part of the challenge we have is that people do not know their rights. Many people do not know their basic rights. So our countries have ratified these conventions to say that these are base standards. This is what you're entitled to. And people don't know their rights, so they're trying to do the best. So sometimes it's a policy agenda, it's a national vision plan, a strategic agenda. And the reason I did the SDGs is because most of our countries have that as a platform that we're working on for sustainable development. So it will be from that as a starting point, but also engaging your communities and ensuring inclusion as far as possible. That's what I would say, but that's an excellent question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we're doing really well with the time. It's excellent timing, and you managed the last answer, so doing really well in terms of the time. So thank you very much, Dr. Dunn, for being here and presenting so much of work, and there's so many different aspects that we could go on, and it's all very, very interesting and very inspiring, and I really hope that some of these participatory methods could be more popular and more used, even though it's so hard, as you're saying.
Yeah.
So with this, I would say thank you also to all the participants. If you're interested in other events, please subscribe to the newsletter. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming and for listening and participating. Thank you very much.
And thank you very, very much for having me. And best of luck to everyone as you continue your research and integrate gender and ensure inclusion using participatory action research methods. Have a great day. God bless.